Well, let's speak now to the SA Energy Forum's Executive Director, Mr. Hlathi Madela, who's joining us on News at Prime. A very good evening to you, sir. Grateful for your time. So these fears, warnings and rumours of an imminent complete collapse of the electricity grid, are they justified?
Let me put it this way. Good evening to you, Tembegile, and good evening to the listeners. You have different groupings of people who are speaking to the problem. Of course, politicians have a right to weigh in on the matter, and we appreciate it coming from the leaders of the political parties that are not in government, because it means they are taking this thing very seriously. However, the parties are talking past each other, because when the politicians like Malema and other ordinary South Africans talk about an imminent potential grid collapse, Eskom, that actually have this fundamental information, they lose the talk that comes from those people. They keep saying that there are contingencies, there are measures in place to make sure that the grid will not collapse. There's a loss of communication between the two parties. Eskom is saying it's never going to get to a point where the grid will not be able to be charged with electrons. They're talking technical terms. The parties like Economic Freedom Fighters and all the other stakeholders, we're talking about the inavailability of electricity over an extended period of a day or two or a week or even 2 weeks. That is a collapse of the grid, because it means electricity is not available where it is required. And it doesn't help for Eskom to go into the technical conversation of saying that we're never going to get to the point where we are unable to charge the grid. That's not what the public is talking about. When you say to me the power is not available in my area for a week, I interpret that as a grid collapse. It's as simple as that.
So how then does Eskom better communicate what is, in essence, a very technical situation? Because you're right, when you listen to the briefings, they're often very highbrow. There's talk of 3,000 megawatts less going into the season versus winter last year. But for the average Joe, that information means nothing.
Can I just be rude, but also stay within the confines of what is happening here and be respectful? I think to all the Eskom people, they're completely useless. There is no leadership there. I cannot imagine a situation where I'm a practicing engineer and everybody's having a talk about my organization, and I'm somewhere in generation and I don't go to the principals of this country and say to them, stop what you're doing. This is a technical matter, and it reflects on our profession and it reflects on our capabilities. The people, the entire leadership of Eskom are playing games with us. They're taking a technically possible solution and they are hiding a number of piles and piles of weddings to try and confuse us. There is enough power in the system. They must go to their government and ask them for the money and return these power stations to service. It's as simple as that. Where is the engineers? Where is the leaders at Eskom? Have you ever had a conversation with a technical person from Eskom? Never. You will never get that chance. You always get sent someone who doesn't know how the things enter. Have you ever had an engineer who says, I'm an engineer, I'm in charge of this particular power station, this is the talk that I have with my head of generation, and this is what I need for my power station in order not to contribute to the load shedding? They can't, because there is a solution. They are handicapped by the inavailability of finances to be able to finance the operations and maintenance. Those people are not leaders. I'm telling them now, those men and women of Eskom, they are completely useless. They have degenerated the engineering profession. They have rendered an insult on our profession, and it's not looking nice, and it's looking very messy. They need to stand up and be counted as engineers and come forward and tell us why is our country is unnecessarily load-shedded when they are engineers and they've got the qualification and experience. They have not been able to do that.
Is it not, Mr. Madela, because they're not authorized to speak, or indeed that the people who hold political office often get so ahead of themselves in these conversations that the experts have basically now have had to take a back seat because the higher-ups who call the shots want to lead the discussions?
Well, then they need to prioritize between their profession and what they've been trained to do and what they've been employed to do versus being represented by the people who don't know what they're talking about. We've had 3 years of people who don't know what they're talking about. We're still listening to the Minister of Electricity, who is a civil engineer. We're listening to the government officials. Give me a head of generation. Give me a head of a power station. Have you ever heard them telling you why we are load shedding the country? It's time for them to come up and tell us. Forget about the principle. The country is in jeopardy here. And they took an undertaking that they will be employed in the capacity of being engineers to be able to run those machines. Where are they to tell us what's going on?
Well, the Eskom head of generation has in fact taken part in some of the briefings. I think even the previous the gentleman who was there in the acting capacity did take part in a few of the briefings that I recall around last year when...
Tembegile, he was telling you stories. I can tell you stories about multiple breakdowns. You need to say to me, it's the pump, it's the boiler, it's the chemicals, it's a bad quality coal, and it was supplied by this guy. It's the milling plant. It's too much air in the system. It's the back filters, and I'm unable to replace them. You need to tell us specifically, technically. They will not have that conversation with us. They will have that conversation with you guys, because when they give you an excuse of multiple breakdown, you take it. You can't have a conversation with me and the decent engineers about the multiple breakdown. You can't come and say, there's a multiple breakdown of a vehicle when you've been sent from Joburg to Johannesburg to Durban to deliver the goods. You don't need to tell your employer what is broken in that vehicle, and then they need to make an assessment whether they send a mechanic to fix it or not. But you can't keep saying there's multiple breakdowns. We've been told about multiple breakdowns for 5 years. What are those multiple breakdowns? No one can tell you. So
you're talking about...
was talking about that.
Right, you talk about not only the presence of the head of generation in an Eskom briefing as has happened in the past, but going basically to the nuts and bolts of what exactly has gone on when they say this has broken down, what is broken, yes. Right? And that brings me to my next question. We know at the moment interviews are going on for the next CEO of Eskom. Do you think if that person is themselves qualified, who's got industry-specific qualifications, that will help steer Eskom in a better direction in not only dealing with the crisis of the electricity shortage itself, but also better communicating so that every South African actually understands what is going on?
They have already manipulated that process. They've already tested the waters if you have not been following. They pre-announced the candidature of Hlathi Madela, who always comes on this show, and a gentleman called Dan Marugani. Those people, at least Hlathi Madela has been able to articulate, even though he's got, you can see that he's not going to challenge the system the way it needs to be challenged. But this other gentleman called Dan Marugani, with all due respect to him, he may be an engineer, he may be having multiple degrees, but he's nowhere to be found in the power generation industry. He doesn't have experience. He's never done anything in his life other than hopping from one job to another. They've already tested the waters by giving us those two names of Hlathi Madela and Dan Marugani. They are leaving behind a gentleman that can sort out this thing. His name is Jacob Maroga. You put him there tomorrow, there will be no load shedding in this country on day 93. Put that man in charge. He knows what he's talking about, but unfortunately, what he wants is not what this government wants, because it's going to take the money that we pay for the electricity and it's going to stop load shedding, just like Brian Molefe did. They want to give us another man to strangle us along for the next 3 years in the name of Hlathi Madela and the name of Dan Marugana. Already, they are messing up with our brains. We must demand Jacob Maroga and somebody to support Jacob Maroga. There is no one else that can solve this crisis. If they announce the name of Hlathi Madela and announce the name of Dan Marugana, you must know we'll be having this conversation again in 3 years. And it might even be worse than it is. Because it's not about solving load shedding, but it's about selecting a candidate that is going to give us these excuses of multiple breakdown, this and that. As an engineer, you don't give excuses. You solve problems. You are trained to solve problems. We're not allowed to say there's a problem that cannot be solved. It's an embarrassment in the world fraternity of engineering to tell the people that you've got an engineering problem that you cannot solve. They now want to put the candidates who are going to speak another language of the previous candidate for the next 3 years. They've already conditioned us.
Mr. Hlathi Madela, good to speak to you on the country's energy crisis. Thank you so much for being on News at Prime.